Privileged to introduce Charlie Gibson. He's a Princeton graduate and a Wright Fellow at the Journalistic Center. He was an editor of the World News with Charles Gibson from '06 to '09, and before that, he was the host of Good Morning America from '87 to 2006. He joined ABC in 1975, where he anchored major ABC News broadcasts through 11 election cycles. Mr. Gibson has interviewed each of the last 7 American presidents and has anchored many broadcasts from both Republican and Democratic national conventions, as well as presidential inaugurations. In '04, he was chosen to moderate the debate between President Bush and Senator John Kerry that was watched by over 47 million people. And he has also interviewed leaders from around the globe, including Kofi Annan, Tony Blair, Yasser Arafat, Nelson Mandela, just to name a few. Throughout his career, he's been awarded several awards, such as the National Journalism Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the John McLean Fellowship from Princeton University, the Paul White Award from the Radio and Television News Directors of America, and the Fred Friendly First Amendment Award from the Quinnipiac University. And today, this discussion's title is Leadership in Current Political News.
First of all, for all of us, a privilege. You have a chance to ask someone who asked the major presidents, who stayed up all night trying to figure out exactly how they would answer them. Secondly, this series is about decisions that Charlie's been involved in making. And so we are really going to have an opportunity to ask him about how they think about what's covered, the choices he's made, the dilemmas, the problems. Let me quit. He's a spectacular person, and it's a privilege, Charlie, to join us.
How do you define a spectacular person?
Very broadly.
Very nice, very nice. I don't know quite how you live up to that, but it's nice to be here. When I came into the business in which I have worked all my life, there were 3 voices. There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. When I was your age and I was graduating from Princeton University, but by the way, I was a terrible, terrible student. So for any of those here who are struggling to finish their education and are not sure whether or not they will ever be awarded the degree to which they seek, you were looking at somebody who does not deserve the degree that he received.
Better be sure to erase that.
I have served on the Princeton Board of Trustees for the last 4 years, and I was on the Honorary Degrees Committee, among other committees that they have on the board. And we would go around the room at the beginning of each year and introduce ourselves to one another, because there were new members coming on the committee every year. And I would say that it was highly appropriate that I be on the Honorary Degrees Committee, because I received one in 1965 from Princeton University when I was 22 years old. We didn't have the internet then. You didn't get your grade results and whatever, but I was going over to the history department every day to make sure that my name was on that list of people who were going to receive a degree, because I wasn't at all certain. So there is hope for those of you who are in the lower percentages of your cohort and your group as you go on. But anyway, I was turned down at the law school that I wanted to go to, which shall remain unmentioned, but I've always hated Yale. And as a matter of fact, when I went into the admissions office at Yale, the guy said, "Mr. Gibson, why are you even here?" So it was not a question as to whether I was going to get in or not. So I went to the Princeton Library, and there was a book there. It was the yearbook of Broadcasting Magazine, and I looked into it, and all the reporters for ABC, CBS, and NBC were listed. And I took note of the fact that there were 110. And I thought, this is a rather quixotic notion. I am going for one job. I want one job in a universe of 110. And I have no experience. How in the world am I going to get one? And I did that because my basic philosophy in life, to the extent I have one, is that we spend our entire lives trying to prove to our parents that we're worth a damn. And my parents were news junkies. Every night I used to watch Huntley Brinkley with my dad. You don't know who Huntley and Brinkley are, probably, but they were the original NBC anchors, and they were sort of the preeminent voices in network news. And I was fascinated by the new way of gathering news that existed, because when I was young, television was a very new medium. You take it as a matter of course. You see high definition television, whatever. The first television that my parents had, the screen was about that big. It was in a box about the size of an armoire in the living room, and it was all black and white and grainy. And there was no such thing as morning television until noon. There was only a test pattern on the screen. That was all there was. And then, lo and behold, in the mid-50s came this idea of television news. It was shot with film. It had to be shipped across the world. I remember the first time there was a television broadcast where there was a camera in New York and a camera in California, and you could see both coasts of the United States at once. That had never been done before. I remember the first time on Good Morning America when we had a reporter sitting in Kabul, Afghanistan. He was sitting in front of a screen no more animated than that. He could have been in Trenton for all anybody knew, but I knew he was in Kabul, Afghanistan. And that was a huge deal. Now you take it for granted, the kind of instantaneous communications that exist. The networks take it for granted that they can put a reporter anywhere in the world and get him on the air within 5 minutes. It is extraordinary how the technology has changed. But in those days, there were only 3 voices, and as I say, I wanted one job of 110. I gave myself to the age of 30 to get one of them. And then when I didn't get one by the time I was 30, I gave myself till I was 35. And I was lucky at the age of 33 to be hired by the American Broadcasting Company. The point of all this is, when you have only 3 voices, you basically have a captive audience. They don't really have too many other places to go. And so what you think is important that they ought to know as a journalist is what you put on the air. There is a sort of continuum that exists when you work in television news. It is the continuum between what people ought to know, or what you think they ought to know as a journalist, and what they want to know. They should know, they want to know. And in those days, we may not have achieved that because you never can be perfect in all of this. But it was way over here in the what they ought to know area. But as the business imperatives of television news have become more important, it continually gets moved over toward what they want to know. And that has had significant effect on the news business. And as we get more and more voices in the marketplace, as you have an expansion of cable voices in news, and soon, I believe, it's going to be, we've gone from those 3 voices that existed when I started to now you have, 600 channels on your cable system, and probably a dozen of those are devoted to news. And that is not to talk about the ones that are devoted to legal news, to education news, to medical news, to food news, to whatever. I'm just talking about news and what I define as news. There's probably a dozen channels that are available to you. And I include in that the pop culture news channels that have entertainment news, etc. But you have, and when we get to the point which we're going to get to within very soon, I hope within my lifetime, but probably within the next 5 to 10 years, when basically cable will be gone, and you're going to have your computer linked to your television screen. And once you get there, we have basically an infinite number of voices because, as you know, there are an infinite number of websites. And more websites, even now, are beginning to develop video components. The New York Times will be essentially a marriage between video and printed news. Google has gone in, now has a Google channel that is going to become more and more apparent and more available to people. They don't know quite what they're going to do with that. Politico, which is a relatively new service that basically website that focuses on political news, has now formed a video component. And basically they're going to be going into 24-hour political news pretty soon. That will be available to you on your television screen. This is all the vanguard of where this is going. So the issue, when you have only 3 voices, as I say, you have a captive audience. And the desire is to be as objective as possible. David Brinkley, back to Huntley Brinkley, David Brinkley used to say there is no such thing as objectivity. There are only lesser degrees of subjectivity. But you certainly strive for that, and my training in the business was to strive for that. So then along come the cable channels, and Roger Ailes, as you know, who's the man who runs Fox News, comes up with a brilliant business plan. I will broadcast to a niche audience. I will deliver news in a different way because I believe, and it's an honest belief on his part, that the news organs, the basic over-the-air channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS, have a leftist bias, have a liberal bias. I'm going to develop a commercial channel, cable channel, that is basically broadcasting a more conservative point of view. And I believe there are different ways of looking at stories that the over-the-air networks don't do. But I'm going to take this, and then in the evening I'm going to put on opinion broadcasting. Well, he has a very small audience, a very, very small audience, compared to what we have at ABC, CBS, and well, I shouldn't say we, I don't work for ABC anymore, but what they have at ABC, NBC, CBS. But it is a group of people who are committed, I would say, in their political viewpoint. And any cable channel that didn't carry Fox would be abandoned by many, many of it's a business imperative for cable operators to carry Fox. And it is an immensely profitable operation that he has developed, even though he has a very small audience, but it's a committed audience. The profit of Fox News is about $700 million a year. That is larger than the combined profits of ABC, CBS, and NBC News. Even if you add in CNN and MSNBC, it's larger than all of those combined. MSNBC, no dummies they, figured, okay, we'll be the antidote. We will begin to liberally broadcast. The point is, it's niche broadcasting. Narrowcasting is the term we use. And as you get into linking your cable operation to your television set, you're going to have more and more narrowcasting, I believe. How do you get noticed in that environment? Maybe you become more shrill. Maybe you become more partisan. Maybe you become more political. I don't know. We don't know. All we know is you need good journalism in this day and age, and we don't know what the new paradigm is going to be and how it's going to be delivered and how you're going to monetize those websites that are now linked to your television set. So over the years, as you've had this expanding number of voices, it has changed the way we make decisions. As I say, you don't think so much anymore about what people need to know. You begin to think about what they want to know because you need to get an audience. The ratings imperative becomes very strong. We now have something called minute-by-minute ratings, which I'll bet you've never heard of. I can tell, looking at the curved line of the minute-by-minute ratings of how many people are watching, which stories are gaining audience and which stories are losing audience. Now, that's dangerous because you begin to think to yourself, what stories am I going to do that will gain audience? And I can tell you what they are. I know. One of them is interesting to all of you. I think health news will always gain you audience. I did Good Morning America for 19 years. I still don't know whether you should take estrogen therapy or not. But one year there's a study that says you should, next year says a study you shouldn't. Back and forth. We did them all because they're very important. Health news is tremendously important to people because they're worried about their own health. But when it comes to a decision about, do you do a story on North Korean nuclear capabilities or do you do a story on some new health study that may or may not be contradicted by another study a year later. A lot of these studies I don't necessarily think have a lot carry a lot of weight, but we would be doing them because the minute-by-minutes will go up. I will tell you that foreign news, guaranteed it'll go down. And I will give you an example of that. When I was first doing World News and filling in for Peter Jennings, he was still alive then. I wrote a tease. You know what a tease is? It's a, stay tuned because coming up is a story on such and such. And somebody came to me and changed it. It was about the situation in Serbia. And they said, no, you don't want to use the word Serbia. I said, why not? Because that's going to drive the audience away. If they're not going to stay through a commercial for a story on Serbia. Talk about American troops that are over there, that's fine. You don't not do the story. It's just the way you talk about it. You try to involve the audience in something, and if you say the word Serbia, boom, it's going to fall apart. I never looked at those minute-by-minute ratings. I avoided them like the plague, but I will tell you, to producers, they are like crack. They can't get enough of them because they have this ratings imperative. So as I say, we've moved on this continuum more and more to things that people want to know. And what do they want to know? It will dismay you if you knew. We did a program for a while. It was a webcast, actually, that you could. I never quite understood how. I think people got it on their vacuum cleaners or on their electric shavers, or I never knew quite. But it was something you could download into your what do you call those things? iPods. Or the webcast. I mean, you probably, because you're all young, you probably know what those things are. I didn't, but I was doing one. And every day we went to Google and we said, what are the fastest rising searches on Google? Because that gives you a really interesting snapshot of what interests people. Now, it's the fastest rising searches on Google, not the most searched for things on Google. You don't want to know what the most searched for things on Google are. Well, you probably knew, no, but I hope you didn't make those searches because you're an intellectual group. Yeah. But somebody walked in one day and said, we have a fastest rising search on Google that has risen faster by a factor of 5 than anything else we've ever encountered on Google. What was it? It was the death of Anna Nicole Smith. Now that is, to me, one more sign that Western civilization is shot. And we actually wound up, but in fairness, when we learned that Anna Nicole Smith had died, 2 people walked into my office and said, wait till you hear this, Anna Nicole Smith has died. Okay. Okay, fine. I'm not fine, but I don't want your death on anybody. But why is that important? And then somebody else walked in and said, Anna Nicole Smith just died. Okay. Then the president of the news division, who never came down to World News, came down and walked in my office and said, did you hear Anna Nicole Smith just died? Well, we got sort of interested in that, everybody around the newsroom was interested. Why? Who cared? Well, presumably the Smith family cared. So we wound up actually doing a story on World News that night, which we never would have done 10, 15 years ago. But we wound up doing it on people who were famous just because they're famous. And one of the sound bites in the piece was the gossip columnist, Liz Smith from the New York Post. And she said, everybody's walking around saying, did you just hear Anna Nicole Smith just died? And then there's no second sentence. There's nothing, I mean, that's it. There's nothing more to the story. But people were fascinated by it. Early on, I led the show one night with the death of Barbaro. You remember who Barbaro was? The horse who won the Kentucky Derby. It was sort of a poor man's horse. It went lame, I think, I've forgotten whether it was the Preakness or the it was going for the Triple Crown. I think it was in the Belmont race that it came up lame, broke a leg. And they tried to save the horse, and it died. And everybody was walking around saying, my Lord, Barbaro died. But we never would have led the show with that 15 years ago. But it brought people into the tent. And then I figured, OK, now we can do the story on the North Korean nuclear problems or whatever. When I first started on Good Morning America, we did a week. There were a series of scientists a couple of scientists at the University of Utah who claimed they had solved the problem of cold fusion. And that was going to be an enormous breakthrough in the production of energy if we could harness cold fusion. I didn't know what cold fusion was. I'm still not sure I know. But we did a week of pieces with actually our science editor who came from Harvard. He's a Harvard physics professor on cold fusion. And whether or not it was going to be possible to duplicate those results, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out scientists couldn't. It was all a mirage, and cold fusion is not proven to be. But we did a week we would never, ever do that today because, again, want to know, or need to know, want to know. When they cloned Dolly the sheep, we did 2 days, for a full half hour, we did a discussion on the implications of that with Arthur Miller, who at the time was a lawyer here at the Harvard Law School, with a Monsignor and a rabbi who called themselves the God Squad, but they were great in terms of talking about the religious implications, again with our science editor, about what was involved in all of this. And then a medical man who actually is from here in Boston, Dr. Tim Johnson, who was our medical editor. And it was a fascinating conversation about the implications of what it meant to be actually able to clone life. It would never happen today. Now, is that a dumbing down of the news? Yeah, probably. And it's unfortunate. But look at the front page of the New York Times today. There are things on the front page of the New York Times that you never would have found there 15 years ago, because they have the same kind of business imperative. And as you probably know, people, well, I'm curious, how many of you buy a daily newspaper every day? I'm not talking about looking at it line. How many of you buy at a newsstand a newspaper?
Is an age gap.
Is there one of you who does that? One of you? How many of you watch an evening newscast twice a week? Oh, bless your hearts. I'll take you all home with me and put you in my will. But very few people do that. I was at the University of Pennsylvania not long ago, and the professor asked them how many, there are probably 200 people in the room, how many watch an evening newscast? There's only about 4 or 5 hands. And she said, what could Charlie Gibson do to make the ABC Evening News more appealing to you? And they all said, don't change anything. It's just our pattern of life doesn't prevent us, or prevents us from watching an evening newscast, because we're busy at 6:30 at night. We're students, and we have a lot of work and whatever. And we see it at our parents' house. And we know the difference between that and, say, Oprah, which a lot of people think is news as well. They don't distinguish between kinds of information. And they said, we'll get to it when we get older and our lifestyle begins to permit it. I don't believe that. I don't think they will, because they're so now conditioned to news from different sources. But the fact that the number of voices has so increased in the marketplace has really changed the business imperative to the point that you have to be conscious, much more conscious, of what people want to know as opposed to what they need to know. So every day, for instance, on World News, when I was there for 4 years, we would end the story with, or end the show with what was a little bit of an upper. You know, the news can be pretty depressing. And so at the end, we tried to put in a human interest story or something that just sort of would lift your spirits a little bit and make you realize that there is goodness in the human condition. And on September, Katie Couric started about the same time I did, and she had this national contest about what should I say at the end of the program. Please send me suggestions of how I should close the show. On September 11th in 2006, which was the 5th anniversary of September 11th, we did an hour show instead of a half hour, and the news was just totally depressing all the way through. We had people who could easily smuggle in fissionable material to the United States. We had, you know, the problems with TSA. You can smuggle a box cutter still through TSA if you want. I mean, it was all, and then it was about what had happened 5 years previous and how discouraging that was. And at the end of the show, just because it had been so depressing for the hour, I said at the end of the program, I'm Charlie Gibson, and I hope you had a good day. And finished the show. Well, a wonderful guy, a young producer, who's an African-American kid, about 40 or 35 years old, who has since passed away, Eddie Pinder, came into me the next day and said, that thing at the end of the show that you said, that was good. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you said something about have a good day. I said, I don't really know what I said. It was just, he said, come on with me. So Eddie Pinder grabbed my hand and took me into an edit room and looked at the end of the show. And I said, that's the ABC Evening News for tonight. I'm Charlie Gibson. I hope you had a good day. And for all of us at ABC News, good night. He said, say that. Say that at the end of the show. He said, the news is so depressing. You got to tell people you hope they had a good day. Well, so I did for 4 years, and I never got so much comment on anything as that close. Katie Couric had a contest nationally across the country. I had Eddie Pinder, and I won. Eddie Pinder was smarter than anybody else in the country, and because it is depressing. So, as I say, we used to do something, tried to do something positive at the end of the show every night. And yet that, again, that is something that would not have been done 20, 25 years ago when television news began because, as I say, the commercial imperatives were not as great. So that's the kind of way you make decisions. You do the stories that are important. You do the stories that you think are important. I'm not a big fan of the blogging business and of people who have, put news on their Twitter, whatever. I mean, I don't understand all of that. I still believe it's important that you have somebody with 30, 35, 40 years of experience putting together the front page of your local newspaper. I still think it's important that you have somebody with that kind of experience putting together the evening newscast. And it was an awesome responsibility, I always thought, Good Morning America, which I did in the morning, which was, as I say, much more news-oriented when I started than when I finished. It was always an honor to be able to say Good Morning America to people. I thought it was the best named program in the history of television. And then when you come to the evening news, the thing I used to love more than any other part of the day was at 3:30, all the senior editors, the foreign editor, the domestic editor, the features editor, the two senior editors, the main writer and myself, would gather in my office, and we would fight about what was going to be in the show that night. And I loved those discussions. And there was always the feature editor, was always, she's a wonderful woman actually, who's left the business and is now getting a degree at the Ed School here at Harvard. She always had the populist voice. I think we should be doing the something or other story. And she always had the sort of pop culture story that she thought would be, but that's an important voice to be in those meetings. And then we'd hoot her down, and then we'd probably do the story because of that commercial imperative. But those battles every day, you believe in the stories that you think ought to be in the newscast, and all of those people had a tremendous amount of experience. And I still think that's really important to put in a news show, and I still think it's important that a broadcast be as objective as you can make it. So the only thing I say to people of your age when you are looking at what news sources you will seek out, seek objectivity. Seek voices that you think are telling it as straight as you can hope to get. Because it's not for the news person or for the newspaper to decide. It's for you to decide. And what's important about news is that you be informed, that you make up your mind. When a network, as it says often these days, we report, you decide, I'm not quite sure just how fair and balanced they really are. They're trying to convince you that you can make up your mind. I think you need the objective sources. That's what you need to seek out. So with that, we'll take questions.
Questions for Charlie. Tell us who you are, and then for Charlie.
Hi, I'm Janet.
I'll bet you have a last name too.
Edwards.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Janet Edwards.
Hi. I was just wondering, when you attract people to the news or to the newspaper with pop culture stories, do you think you get their attention for the other news that you're trying?
Hope so. Hope so. Television is a linear thing. When you pick up a newspaper, your eye skips across the page, and you read what you want to read. We're linear, so whatever we put on the air, you have to watch. I mean, there's not an option. Now, some of these channels, put these lower third things down, and there's a crawl going across the bottom of the screen, and maybe you're getting one thing up at the top of the screen and another thing at the bottom. But there are actually studies that show that that doesn't work. You actually retain more if there's just one thing on the screen. So we're linear, and so you have to watch what we put on as opposed to skipping around in a newspaper. But there are studies that indicate once they've got you, you're going to absorb other parts of that newspaper. So it makes sense for the New York Times to put, pop culture is probably an unfair, but a human interest story is almost always now on the front page of the Times, sometimes below the fold. One of the interesting things, if you look at the New York Times with any regularity, they have a photo editor now who is concentrated on the front page, who's doing a heck of a job. They are really doing more with the photography on the front page of the Times than they ever did before. In the old days, the Times used to defy you to try to buy that newspaper. We're going to make this front page so bloody boring. But you may feel good about it because you're getting articles on Sudan and on whatever on the front page. Now, it's a much more engaging front page, although there are days still when they defy you. The old gray lady of the New York Times is. The New York Post and the New York Daily News much more entertaining and whatever with their snappy headlines. But they're doing things to bring you in the tent. They're doing it with photography. They're doing it with human interest stories on the front page. And yes, you will absorb more with the paper simply because you've bought it. It's now $2 if you buy it here in Cambridge, and you're not going to waste $2 just reading one story. You're going to look through the paper.
Hi, my name is Sophia Chu, and I'm a Master of Science
student from the Global Health and Population Department. I have to say that ABC World News has a special place in my heart because I actually learned English by watching news, first with Mr. Jennings and then with you. So my question...
Any grammatical mistakes you make, you picked up from Peter Jennings.
Okay, I remember that. My question is actually about news with regarding global health. So there is a trend of making connections between global health or population health issues with other areas such as economic issues, national security, even the climate change. But however, I think there's also a trend in news reporting nowadays by labeling or fragmenting the issues by labeling as health issue or just as national security issue. What do you see, like in light of what you mentioned about cable news going out in the future? What do you see, like how do you see that fragmentation or connection going?
Well, in many respects, the fragmentation, I worry about the fragmentation. First of all, in terms of global health issues, you know, that's just not something that we would do much on the evening news anymore. Again, I point to the business imperatives because, bless your heart, with your degree, you're basically, in your fascination with this subject, is in the minority in this country. People are not sitting around talking at the dinner table about global health. Or if they do, it's a conversation that's probably you're not going to be terribly interested in. And so those kinds of stories, you can get to them tangentially. You know, when there's a cholera outbreak in Haiti, when there are basic problems or tremendous problems that exist in one part of the country. In Zimbabwe, for instance, there are terrible health problems. We actually did a couple of stories on the situation in Zimbabwe and the terrible inflation that exists there and how healthcare is not getting to people there. We've done a number of stories on Gates initiatives in global health. We've done stories on, needless to say, the AIDS epidemic in various places. All of those touch on what you're talking about, but it's not something that's done widely or done probably as much. The foreign news hole is smaller, even though we take very seriously the name World News on the broadcast. The amount of stories that are done from outside the United States are fewer, and our resources internationally are fewer, unfortunately. As we have had to contract the resources, we've tried to do as much with a less amount of money because the economics of the business have changed, and part of what has been sacrificed to that is overseas news. But again, in those minute-by-minute ratings, the overseas news is not going to be terribly popular. Yes, when we get to the greater fragmentation of the news with websites, there will probably be websites totally devoted to global news, or to global health, that are doing video, that will have a video component. And so the fragmentation in some respects will be positive in that there will be information available to you on these subjects just as there is in the internet in ways that wasn't possible before, and that will be true in terms of video. Now, what kind of an audience it will have, how large it will be, and how you monetize it, as I say, those are things we still don't know.
Yeah.
Thanks. My name's Rob Bulow, and thank you.
Oh, I thought your initials were AE because it's on your shirt. But that's all right. Why don't you have RB on your shirt?
So my question is, you've talked about this trend in the shift between news covering stories that people need to know towards more what people want to know. And I'm asking you, as a communicator and a public figure, speaking to other future communicators and public figures, what strategies would you give to us to make the stories that people need to know into stories that people want to know?
Well, basically, you know, one of the things that people will say in our business, in my old business, is I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. And that can be done, it's done more and more, not in the macro, but in the micro. And we had, for instance, a producer and a correspondent who worked for World News, who were good friends, believed in one another, and the producer had a severely autistic child. And so the two of them basically set out to do a whole series of, we probably did more stories on autism and what it is and what really is in the spectrum and all of the business of this crazy group that thinks it's, you know, from inoculations, et cetera. But we got those stories on because they had such compelling people through which they could tell the story. Now, you can take it too far. One of our producers used to say, at the beginning of a medical piece, if you see a little girl swinging at the beginning of the piece, you know she's toast. And so you have to be original in the way you tell those stories. But basically, that's the way you do it, which is to try to find a human connection in these stories. And then tell it in a way that doesn't become a cliche. Don't make that little girl toast. You know, find something. But in terms of medical news, again, it is so dry to talk about statistics, you know, of comparative tuberculosis ranges or smallpox or whatever worldwide. But if you can tell it in a way that's really compelling and make it related to a specific person or a specific group of people or whatever, that's the way to tell those stories. And you can do it, I think, very effectively.
All right, let's go. Here, I lost somebody on the back row. I'll get to you in the middle row next. Right here? Okay, we'll do. He's better answering than I'm directing.
My name is Shoman. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training. And I have a lot of difficulty getting good at, you know, what I want to do for my career. But people like you deal with such diverse range of topics every day, from Anna Nicole Smith to estrogen therapy to cold fusion. My question is, how do you get, how do you practically get so good at reporting or understanding something that you could make, you know, president of a
I'm not sure
country
you ever do.
uncomfortable?
I'm not sure you ever do. I used to say that there are millions of jobs in this world for specialists, of which you are one, and I'm sure outstanding. And there are very few jobs for generalists. And I had one of those. My knowledge of many things is an inch deep. Yours hopefully is a little deeper. And I used to say I'm not a doctor. I just play one on TV sometimes. But yeah, it's just you have to be a quick study. And when people would always ask about interviewing other people and how do you approach an interview. You approach it by trying to find out what the other person's basic level of expertise is, what their arguments are, what they believe in, what you're on to talk about, and then find the weakness in their arguments. And just explore those to the extent that you can. But you damn well better know how to follow up in questions and not make a fool of yourself. But often I made a fool of myself. This gentleman who introduced me mentioned introducing Yasser Arafat once. Arafat turned on me and said, "You don't know what you're talking about," in the middle of one interview. And he was right. But you can't say that, you know, because it's going to destroy the whole thing. It was one of the less successful interviews that I ever did. But you have to do that, and you have to find a way to do a question that's going to challenge somebody without it being disrespectful. I remember wrestling. Gee, this is all on camera, so I probably shouldn't talk about it. But I remember wrestling with. We got the only interview, actually, television interview, with John McCain at the Republican convention in 2008, and I really wrestled without being disrespectful to his choice of vice president. I wrestled with a couple of things. It had been revealed that day, or the day before the interview, that her daughter was pregnant and was not married. Do you ask about that? I decided not to. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but there was nothing he could say, basically. I already knew from the staff that he knew about it. They had internalized that. They'd made the decision. And so, you know, I mean, is it wrong? Millions of families go through this, and her family goes through this. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a young woman who unfortunately became pregnant, and to her credit, perhaps decided to keep the baby, etc. So I thought it would lead nowhere, so I decided not to ask that. But I did say to him, and I tried to figure out, how do you ask the Sarah Palin question? without being in any way disrespectful. And so I said to him, can you look the camera right in the eye? Can you say to the country, entirely confident in your own soul that you're telling the truth, can you say to the country, this woman is qualified to be the Vice President of the United States and maybe President? Now that, you know, how do you word the question? How do you do it? You think a lot about that. I just did a debate I did the last debate of the gubernatorial candidates in Massachusetts. We've seen their negative ads up the bazoo. They debated a number of times before I could almost recite their lines because I'd watched most of the debates. So I said to them, so how do you start the debate? And I wanted to do some way that would engage people, bring them in. You don't want people turning on, oh, this is the same thing I've heard again and again, and they flip it off. You want something that, because once you get them at the beginning, you've got them for the whole debate. So I thought about what to do, and I said, I've seen all your negative ads. I'm sick of them. I've heard your, political spiels at the beginning of these debates. But what I haven't heard is a sense of vision. And I haven't heard any poetry from you about why it would be better to have the state of Massachusetts in your hands for the next 4 years than these other people sitting here. So give me some poetry about your vision for what's ahead in Massachusetts. They can't do it. They can't do it. They went back to the canned speeches, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, hell, I've blown it. All I'm getting is the canned speeches again, playing to their base and whatever. But you try to find some way to question somebody, A, that won't show your ignorance of the topic, and B, that will elicit something that will increase the knowledge of the people who are watching that interview. That's basically how you approach it. Then we got the Sarah Palin interview, first one with her. And again, how do you do that? I don't want to do gotcha questions, because I think that cheapens the interviewer. The best piece of advice I got was from a friend of mine who works for Time magazine. And he said, don't prepare an interview for Sarah Palin. Prepare an interview for Joe Biden, and then ask those questions of Sarah Palin. And then you'll be fair to her. And I thought that was terrific advice. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, you're supposed to call on the people.
One more.
Oh,
Betty's a tough director.
We got time.
I already have the microphone.
Oh, okay, you win. You win.
You've already learned the strategy here.
Hi, I'm Erica Warner. I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Epidemiology.
Good for you.
Oh, thank you. I wonder if you could talk about how we maintain...
Where do you want to work? What's your dream job?
I'm still figuring that out myself, but I'm a cancer researcher, so I think I'll continue to work in that area. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit as we close about how we maintain journalistic ethics and the standards.
Ooh, you have a Princeton jacket on back there. Is that a Princeton jacket? It is. Oh, we'll do the secret handshake after.
And standards of reporting. Now that the media is coming from more than 3 voices, and you've encouraged us to try and find, as much objectivity as possible.
Oh, it's there. Objectivity is there.
How do you locate it, and how do you keep things from being widely reported, like the Obama trip that was supposedly, costing billions of dollars, was talked about on
$200 million a day to go to India.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And Anderson Cooper dug deeply and found that it came from, a single person in India.
Yeah, good for him. Sure, the birthers. I mean, it's crazy. That story won't die. I think we all believe, we know that Barack Obama was born in this country. The story that he's a Muslim, that there's a percentage of people in this country who believe it. What difference would it make if he were? But they still believe this. There's the inoculation story on autism that just it doesn't go away. But you're all smart. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And you know objectivity when you see it and when you hear it. And I trust the gut of the American public in the long run. Now, they may get seduced by the Anna Nicole Smith story, or they may go off on a Lindsay Lohan jag for a while, or there may be a Brad Pitt sighting that well, even there's a Brad Pitt sighting, I get that. And so you know, I understand all of that. But in the long run, you just have to trust the gut of people, and I do. And interestingly, I think the public has a greater understanding in many cases of what's going on than do the politicians. For instance, I think, and I'm getting off into political prognostication here, but I think the public, what happened in this last election was not saying, my goodness, we've all of a sudden turned really conservative and we are now all Republicans and that's why we're going to elect Republicans. I think the country is saying, we're sick of you people in Washington. It's not working for us. We got 9+ % unemployment in this country. You look at where the Democrats lost seats. They lost them in Western New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois. They lost them in the Rust Belt. That's where the jobs, that's where people look at the economy changing right beneath their feet and they can't get a job and they're frustrated. And so they're swinging from pillar to post. You know, we had 3 change elections right in a row. In 2006, the Senate and the House went Democratic. In 2008, the presidency went Democratic. And then in 2010, the House goes Republican and the Senate damn near goes Republican. And if it weren't for the crazy Tea Party people who chose Christine O'Donnell in Delaware and Sharon Angle in Nevada, it probably would have gone Republican. The public, but the public understands that this isn't working for them, and they're reacting against that. The Republicans are running around saying, "My goodness, look at this! So, you know, there's this massive mandate for us." I don't think that's true. I think the country is frustrated that the government is not working for them, and it's not addressing the problems of this country. We've got terrible deficit problems, and just in the last week, Congress ducked them and made it worse. And what did Barack Obama get in trade? Because he got $56 billion more in unemployment benefits, which is necessary, but still is going to cut deeper into the deficit. You can't address the global warming problems of the country because Congress won't do it. You can't address the immigration problems because they're scared to do that. You can't truly get health reform in this country that's going to change the way we deliver medicine and maybe save money. We passed a bill. Good for you, it's going to have some improvements, but it's not really what we need to do. All of the problems, the real problems in this country are being ignored by our leaders, and I think the public senses that, and they're pissed at Washington. And that's what we got in that election, I think, and I think most other people that I talk to think. Not necessarily a mandate for one part or the other. It's just, please, can't we get somebody who can do something about the problems in this country instead of being so polarized and so political and kicking all these problems down the road because they're worried that they might lose the next election if they actually address them. We had a deficit commission within the last couple of weeks that did really a pretty good job in going at what needs to be done. But politically, every one of those things is unpalatable. And they couldn't get the majority of the commission. Well, they got the majority. They couldn't get the 14 members of the commission to agree that they needed. And if they can't get the commission to agree, how the hell are they going to get Congress to do something about it when these people are only worried about their next election? So I think the country really has a pretty good gut sense about what's going on. And I think the country knows what's objective and what's not. You know what's objective and what's not when you look at it. And I think people sense it as well. Now, are there a bunch of wingnuts who want news that solely reinforces their own point of view? Yeah. I wish they would seek objectivity, but they don't. But I still think the majority of this country does. I think the most underrepresented in Washington group of people in this country is the majority, who are in the middle, who are basically very sensible-minded and very agnostic, basically, about liberality or conservatism. They just want problems addressed, and they want government to work for them, and it doesn't right now.
Charlie, I've got to be the producer here.
With time, we have one more.
Oh, sure. Good.
Ah.
Well, I'm having fun, so I'll stay as long as you want.
She's overriding.
I'll stay as long as you want.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. There we go.
I still want to know what your ultimate job is, okay, we'll talk later. Okay. And I want to have the secret handshake with you. When did you graduate?
2005.
2005. Was it a good experience?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Was it? So you've got black and orange tattooed on your tush somewhere? You know, the Secretary of State, George Shultz, who was one of the great secretaries of state of the United States, has a tiger tattooed on his rear end. You know that. You know that. It's true. It's true.
Can we shrink that one on the table?
Thank you. I'm not from Princeton.
I do not, by the way. I just want to say. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm not from Princeton. I'm from Uganda, and I'm Serufu.
They're very close to one another. It's people mistake them all the time.
Yeah, and in Uganda they say that it's not a story when a tiger bites a man, but it's a story when a man bites a tiger.
Sure.
And going back on what talking about the publicity that
in this country, it's man bites dog and dog bites man. But maybe in Uganda, but I don't think there's tigers in Uganda, are there?
there are.
There are?
Yeah.
I thought they were all in India. Okay.
Yeah. So talking about the publicity that Africa gets, there's a lot of we feel that there's a lot of negative publicity that Africa gets in the Western press. So as someone who sits in the media rooms that decides which stories that go out to the American public, how do you decide what goes out?
To begin with, not to pat ABC on the back, we're the only over-the-air network that has a full-time reporter in Africa, based in Nairobi. Uganda, needless to say, got a lot of bad publicity in this country because of Idi Amin, and I think there's still people who believe that Idi Amin's in power in Uganda. But it's an extraordinary story of what's happened in that country since he left. Is it a story told on the American television? No. Again, it's not something that's going to be particularly popular in terms of, again, those minute-by-minute ratings or what people ought to know. And so much of, well, first of all, one of the interesting things is people don't talk about Uganda in this country. They talk about Africa. It's like it's one country. I think so the number of countries in Africa, I think, is the second greatest of any continent in the world. But it's all indistinguished, and I would doubt, to be honest with you, that if you showed people a map of Africa, I'll bet you not 1 out of 100 people could tell you what country is Uganda on that map. It's shameful in many respects. It's also a reflection of the fact that when Americans study geography in schools, they study geography of areas that are white. And Africa sort of gets lumped together, as I say. It is what it is. There is no particular economic incentive for us to have even one reporter in Africa, strangely enough. And economics controls so much of the business. But is it unfortunate that doesn't get reported? That strangely enough, that I have a son-in-law who works for the Gates Foundation, and we had a reporter, a fellow named Jim Wooten, who came from the New York Times, who was particularly interested in news from your continent. And so that skewed our coverage to some extent. But the Gates Foundation now is getting some publicity for efforts that are there. There are, because of the AIDS problem, there's the life expectancy in some countries. Mozambique, for instance, are disgraceful. That's coming up gradually, again, a global health issue and a problem. But it gets reported from that perspective. I've been interested, for instance, to watch the Ivory Coast in the last couple of weeks, where there's been a really interesting election, an election that was probably stolen in terms of where the results are. But even the candidate who is the insurgent candidate really has problems in and of himself. That's been very scantily reported on television. The newspapers have actually done a decent job with that election, I think, and it's been more widely reported. I think that's actually something of an encouraging sign. But it is what it is, and it's been ever thus. News from that continent is probably less reported, I guess, than any other continent in the world, and I don't know how to excuse it, nor do I, but I can't explain it simply from an economic standpoint.
Charlie, I have promised the people that we'd be able to catch the next class schedule. Let's just say, because he won't say it, this is one of the most spectacular interviews that I've ever seen, and he's on the other side of the camera, and this has really been a spectacular experience. We thank you, and be sure each one of you, as your career evolves, write him a note. He asked for it, we're going to give it to him. Thanks again.
Well, I had a don't apply this. I had a study group that I met with each week while I've been here at Harvard. I've just been here for a semester, they're an extraordinary group of kids, 3 undergraduates, 13 kids from the Kennedy School. And I said to them last night, as we had our last meeting, I said, I'm invested in all of you now. I want all of you to do well. I want you to matter in life. I want you to have an interesting life, and I want you to matter, because that's what it's all about. And you can matter in so many different ways. You can matter as a doctor. You can matter as a global health expert. You can matter as a cancer epidemiologist. You can matter in so many different ways. You can matter as a great parent, or as a scout leader, or as somebody who's active in your church or whatever. But the important thing is that you matter. But all of you, given what you're doing, and I have some ideas of the kinds of things you're doing, are pretty spectacular. I am so pleased here at Harvard to have met so many students from overseas. It is wonderful having people coming to this country from other places. I hope you go home with good feelings about this country, because the people here, we managed to screw things up so badly in so many different areas. I think we're screwing things up badly in terms of government right now. But this is a good-hearted nation, and the people in this country care in many ways that even they don't realize. They're very isolationistic. We're protected by 2 oceans. We have tended not to engage ourselves with the rest of the world. But there's good people here, and I hope you have experienced that when you've been at Harvard. I have been so pleased that there are so many people from overseas here, particularly at the Kennedy School. I think it's from the questions that are in here, I've reflected in the School of Public Health as well. And as I say, I hope you carry home, when you go back home, good feelings about this country. And I hope you all matter. And as I said to my study group, I'm invested in you. I want to hear from you. But don't write every week. All the best to all of you.
I will not applaud, but it does not prevent you. Thank you very, very much.